Greetings, good listeners, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, where we share stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. I'm your host, Dan Dick. Some people in Mennonite history are so productive, one wonders how they found the time and energy to do everything. One such person was teacher, farmer, preacher, and author Peter Jacob Klassen. Klassen was born in Orlov in the Molochna Mennonite colony in Imperial Russia in 1889. When he was just 4 years old, his parents moved the family to Spat, Crimea. At the village school in Spat, 10-year-old Peter read about the war in South Africa where the Afrikaners were fighting the British. Fueled with a desire to help, Peter and two classmates set out for South Africa on foot, thousands of kilometers away from the Crimea. We don't know how much young Peter knew about the long journey across land and sea, but we do know his absence prompted an organized search for the boys. By the time the police found them, they were already south of Simferopol, some 20 kilometers from home. After graduating from secondary school, Peter studied business in Simferopol. He also earned a teacher's diploma. In his youth, he began writing poems and stories both in High and Low German and read extensively. At age 18, Peter took on his first teaching job in Ivanovka, a new settlement near the Amtrak Mennonite colony and the Volga River, about 1,000 kilometers east of Spat. There, the young teacher met Elisabet Liese. Their marriage was described as a durable and loving one. In 1913, the family moved to Rogachik, not far from the Kortitsa and the Molochna colonies. Here, Peter worked briefly as a bookkeeper, then became a successful dealer for International Harvester, a farm equipment maker. When World War I began, they returned to Ivanovka, where Peter bought and operated a flour mill. But poor health intervened. So, in 1917, the Klassens moved to Ebenfeld, 25 kilometers from Ivanovka, where Peter resumed teaching. It was a tumultuous time. The Russian Revolution and then a civil war erupted as communist Bolsheviks, known as the Reds, fought government opponents, known as the Whites. Battles raged outside the thick walls of the village houses and school, with bullets whistling and shells crashing, but no villagers were killed. In 1920, they moved back to Ivanovka and onto Liese's parents' farm. Here, Peter's leadership skills began to flourish. During the Civil War, he intervened on behalf of Mennonites who were forced into the army. With some success, he argued that Mennonites had been exempted from military service based on historical government policy. Death is a sad feature of war. Men who were taken prisoner often faced execution, and Klassen was sometimes called upon to counsel them in their last moments. In 1921, after the Russian Revolution, the Lowen family farm was confiscated by the new regime, but the Civil War continued. The family fled back to Ebenfeld with the Reds in hot pursuit. Here, Peter was allowed a small plot of land, and he invented a horse-driven pump to irrigate his field. An agricultural official from Moscow, out of ignorance or spite, had instructed Ebenfeld farmers how to farm. He locked granaries filled with the seed grain they needed for fall planting. Mennonite, Catholic, and Lutheran farmers of the Amtrak region elected the articulate and gifted Klassen to travel to Moscow in 1922 and intercede on their behalf. Klassen packed 2 suitcases full of rubles to pay for expenses and bribes. Klassen faced repeated threats of a firing squad in Moscow. In his diary, he had criticized the Soviet regime, so he kept it carefully hidden. His mission was a dangerous but ultimately successful trip. He convinced the Minister of Agriculture that they did know how to farm. He later wrote about this in his German-language novel entitled Once a Homeland. Klassen was known for his critique of fellow Mennonites. He deeply loved his community, but felt their spiritual inheritance was disintegrating. Nonetheless, he was elected minister of the Ebenfeld Mennonite Church in Amtracht in 1923. In 1924, the family moved once again to Leonardauka in the Arkadek colony, where Peter began teaching again. In total, he taught school for about 12 years. Danger seemed to follow Peter Klassen. He was an outspoken minister and became a target of authorities. At one point, he was warned that the Reds had him on their blacklist. It was time to leave. In 1925, Peter, Liese, and their 5 children began their journey to Canada. Peter called their escape a nightmare. They waited for weeks in Moscow to board a train bound for Riga in Latvia. Authorities searched for him, but ended up searching the wrong train. At long last, the Klassen family passed through the Red Gate at the Latvian-Russian border and into freedom. The family finally arrived in Rostern, Saskatchewan, where Klassen worked for the Canadian Mennonite Board of Colonization, helping other Mennonite refugees fleeing the new communist regime in the Soviet Union. In 1927, the board asked him to supervise the building of the superb Mennonite church near Herschel, Saskatchewan, where newly arriving Russian Mennonites were settling. Family photographs show Klassen among the builders of the structure. Family stories tell of him doing a headstand on the roof. In January 1928, the Board of Colonization asked him to serve as minister for families in the superb area, and so the Klassens moved yet again. They were one of 10 families for whom the board arranged the purchase of Excel farms. Herman Heinemann, an absentee American landlord from Chicago, had previously owned the land. Heinemann sold 26 quarters, or 4,160 acres, to the families for $50 an acre. For each farm, Heinemann supplied horses, cows, chickens, some machinery, a windmill, and all the building materials needed for a house, a barn, 2 granaries, and an outhouse. He also supplied a manager and 2 carpenters. Peter kept busy farming and leading the church choir. He preached regularly in the Ebenfeld Saskatchewan church, at neighboring Mennonite churches, and at services held in the Klassens' home. His church work often kept him away from his farm. During the dirty 1930s, recurring droughts and soil-eroding winds made successful farming almost impossible. Farming was not Peter's first choice, but he was determined to make the best of it on his 3/4 sections of land. Klassen is said to have devised tools and implements such as a lathe, a plow hitch, and a grain auger that he patented. From Klassen's journals, we know that his 5 growing sons and daughters were very much involved in the farm work. Peter and Liese had 5 more children in Canada. Sadly, of their 11 children, 2 died at a young age, 1 in Russia and 1 in Canada. Klassen journaled about field work, cattle and crops, and church services held in their home, which were often followed by meals that Liese prepared for everyone. After 2 years focused on farming, he found time to write insightful and often humorous poetry, skits, and stories for German-language periodicals such as Der Bote. His audience included adults, youth, and children. In spite of writing extensively, he earned little income for his literary efforts. Klassen was an idealist and independent thinker, an avid reader and prolific writer. While still in Russia, he'd chosen the Latin pen name Quidam, meaning anyone or a specific one. He continued this practice by signing his articles in Der Bote with the name Peter Quidam. Over several prairie winters, Klassen wrote 6 novels. Mennonite literary critics later described his work as remarkable and filled with a poignantly realistic sadness and dramatically told. When not writing, Peter spent winter evenings on the farm reading to Liese and their children from an eclectic array of authors. He corresponded with David Taves and B.B. Jantz of the Canadian Mennonite Board of Colonization, and writers such as J.H. Jansen, Arnold Dick, Abram J. Friesen, poet Gerhard Lowen, and others. Klassen corresponded regularly with Professor Watson Kirkconnell, a literary scholar at Acadia University in Nova Scotia, Dr. Kirk Connell surveyed published Canadian literature in languages other than English and French. The two wrote each other from 1938 to 1951, Kirk Connell in English and Klassen in German. Klassen served as minister and choir director for 20 years in the church he helped build at Superb and in 2 other Mennonite congregations nearby, but chronic ill health forced him into retirement. In 1948, Peter and Liese sold their farm and moved to Yarrow, British Columbia, along with their younger children. There, Klassen occasionally delivered sermons in the United Mennonite Church. He purchased a bookshop and operated it as Klassen's book and variety store. Initially successful, the business faded as membership in local Mennonite churches declined and the Mennonite high school closed. Peter shuttered the business, and it became a place to store unsold supplies, files and archives, and his books. A small raspberry patch in the Klassen's yard and his novel sales added little to his and Liese's income. While still farming in Saskatchewan, Klassen had self-published his plays, short stories, and novels. In Yarrow, he focused on his creative writing, where he continued his children's series and wrote articles for Der Bote. He also worked on his most successful German-language novel, Lost Sons. First published as a series in periodicals, the book advanced peace ideologies and celebrated the spiritual heritage of his beloved Mennonite community. Robert Martins, one of the authors of a history book of Yarrow, BC, describes Klassen's writing as stories of a people who had frequently abandoned their roots, of Russian Mennonites grown indolent after years of peace and prosperity in the 19th century, of a squandered spiritual inheritance. The Conference of Mennonites in Canada published 5,000 copies of Klassen's Lost Sons in 1951. In 1986, the German-language periodical Mennonitische Post republished the story of Uncle Klaus. Klassen was acclaimed in his Yarrow community for his literary efforts and by Der Bote readers. Church youth groups presented his Low German plays, and his poems were recited at weddings and anniversaries. In January 1953, a stroke affected Klassen's writing hand. After months of recovery at home and a gradual return to better health, he suffered a second, more severe stroke while in his raspberry garden. He died that summer on July 19th at the age of 64. In the obituary Liese wrote for Der Bote, she lovingly described Peter's final days and told of a dream Peter had just before his stroke. She wrote, "He was in a wonderful place where all the people seemed so familiar." The Mennonite Heritage Archives in Winnipeg holds a collection of Peter J. Klassen's diaries, some of his published work, and photographs, as well as a 2007 book by Robert Martins entitled Windows to a Village, Life Studies of Yarrow Pioneers. It contains interviews with 3 of the Klassen children. To learn more about Peter J. Klassen and see photos related to this episode, visit mharchives.ca. As always, we're happy to receive your comments and questions about this program via email to info@mharchives.ca.
Hello, I'm Archivist Conrad Stace. The Mennonite Heritage Archives is a community-supported memory center that relies on donations from community members like you. To support this program and the preservation of Mennonite history, visit mharchives.ca and click on Support, or give us a call at 204-560-1998. Thanks also to our partners, Canadian Mennonite University, the Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, Mennonite Church Canada, and Golden West Radio.
The script for this story on Peter J. Klassen was researched and written by Helene Workington. In an upcoming episode, I'll chat with Aaron Coop-Unger, who blogs at manitoba.com about all things Mennonite and has a special soft spot for visiting cemeteries. As always, thanks to the Tales team of Conrad Stace, Graham Unruh, and now a newcomer, David Klippenstein. David takes the place of Graham, who is off to university. I'm your host, Dan Dick. Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives will be back soon with more stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.